And hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me now. Storm Knight here, talking to you here. Going to be continuing on with our reading here of the first book of the Possibility Wars, Storm Knights from the Torg collection. Originally published back in 1990 with as a prep to the original game. I hope everyone can hear me well. I'm back on my home equipment here, which has a much better microphone than what I was using last time. A few housekeeping things. I do plan to be playing Alex. Since I do have the index, I plan to do that sometime here as soon as I can finish setting up so I can actually see the chat when I go online. And of course get spooked by everyone trying to do things while in the middle of the chat. It's just going to take me a little time here. Probably go for a little bit here. Try to get to maybe chapter 29 or 30 today. And that, I hope everyone is staying safe. I'm doing this kind of as a break from where I am. Usually, I'm on the front end of this current little problem with the human malware, as most of the techies have been calling it here. So it's nice to take a little breather and read a little bit here. And if you are missing out on these recordings, I am planning to back it up onto YouTube as a show there. Just check the link down below to look at the archive. And without further ado, we finished off chapter 14 of the first book of Storm Knights, and we are ready to go on with the next chapter. So without further ado. You might hear a little bouncing in the background here. I am expecting an important message here. That's why I have to keep a little bit of a bouncing on it. Thank you, Red. That's kind of nice of you to host the stream here. So, like I said, if you want to catch up on the first 14 chapters of this book, you can go into my YouTube account, and you can actually hear the rest of the story there. I'm doing fine, Red. Just keep amping it up here. So, am I coming through okay? I just been mucking around with the microphone settings here to make sure I got it right. I hope I'm sounding all right for you. So, let us begin. Chapter 15. Hey, Cry. Hope you're doing okay over there. Good. I'm hoping to get a little bit of a cloud dampener here so I can actually eliminate a little more echo from the room here. But right now, with the microphone that I currently have, it's much better than what I had last week. So, Chapter 15. Sergeant Dyskra couldn't get his radio to work. He also couldn't get his jeep to start or his compass to tell him which way was north. In fact, nothing seemed to be working. Damn, he said, throwing his compass in anger. What do we do now? Corporal Wilson slammed the jeep hood and shrugged. Beats me. You're in charge of this operation. Yeah, he thought, what a privilege. They had been on practice maneuvers when the call came through. Two of them had been given a jeep and a radio, and then told to range ahead to reconnoiter the land while Alpha Company waited to hook up with Bravo Company, another National Guard unit from further south. Who were they kidding anyway? The whole lot of them were nothing but a bunch of weekend warriors from Buffalo and Erie. But until the Army could get its act together, it was up to the National Guard to scope out the situation. You'd think that they could have found a couple of units closer to New York City, Wilson muttered as he tried the radio again. They tried, but they couldn't reach anyone within 300 miles of the place. No radio, no telephone, no nothing. Just like us. Yeah, just like us. They were going along well, making good time. They wanted to reach Elmira on the New York-Pennsylvania border before it got too dark. But just 25 miles out or so, everything shut off. They were stuck, and they couldn't even get a word back to their unit. So what do we do, Sarge? What else can we do? We wait. Chapter 16. Cursed was controlled chaos in physical form. Not that he appeared wild, but his eyes hinted of a savage sport, and his sweat smelled of thick forests. If you watched him long enough, you could detect his primal nature. He wore a compact, powerful body around his wildness. Just under 6 foot, he was definitely muscular, but not bulky. He moved with fluid grace, almost lupine in nature. Every silent step appeared to be the one that would set his taut muscles free, that would send his body springing wildly into the night. But he stayed on track, in control of every movement. Thick brown hair fell to just above his jawline. A warm wind blew his hair back, exposing the tapered tips of his ears. His slightly angled eyes glowed in the dim twilight. He paused briefly, unconcerned with the falling rain. Bending down, he scooped up a handful of mud and sniffed it. A step, another scoop of mud. Then he was off, sprinting silently into the gathering gloom. Hidden behind the overgrowth, barely perceptible to past shadow that was subtly deeper than the shadows around it. He could hear the change in the wind as it blew across the hollow opening, and he could smell the fear of his quarry, drawing him forward. Pushing past the overgrowth, the hunter filled the cave mouth. He paused for a moment, reaching out with every sense. The stormer within the cave pulled back, trying to shrink from the hunter's dark form. This world was no different than the countless others the hunter filled. The hunter filled the cave mouth. He paused for a moment, reaching out with every... Looks like they misprinted that there, sorry. This world was no different than the countless others, the hunter thought. Even those with the power to oppose him and his master were too frightened to fight for their miserable lives. Perhaps that was why the gaunt man was destined to succeed in his grand vision. Was it not the way of every reality that the stronger take what they needed from the weaker? Does not the wolf kill the deer for sustenance? Why shouldn't the gaunt man take what he needs from these pathetic beings? It was the way of nature, no matter what world you are on. The hunter entered the small cave. The game was over. He just had to finish his move. Then he could return to the keep. "Come with me, Stormer," Curse said, using words of this world that the gaunt man had impressed into his mind. You never had a chance against me. You are the deer, I am the wolf, and the conclusion of our chase was never in doubt. Perhaps the hunter had grown careless. Perhaps his confidence had blocked out the messages of his senses. Whatever the reason, he barely reacted in time as the stormer slashed out with a long knife. As it was, the sharp blade had cut through his tunic, leaving a long gash across his chest. He could smell his own blood, feel the heat of it as it oozed from the gash. It wasn't deep, and he had endured worse pain, but it had been a long time since his quarry had drawn any of his blood, let alone first blood. Perhaps there was more to these stormers after all. "So," the hunter growled as he stepped back out of range of the knife, "the stormer has claws." In the darkness of the cave, the hunter could see the wild whiteness of the stormer's eyes. He could see the glint of the silver blade, but more, he could smell the intense emotion that emanated from the man, a combination of fear and excitement and anger. Suddenly, the hunt had become interesting again. "I have claws too, Stormer," Kirst explained in a low, menacing voice. He advanced, ready to end the game. Chapter 17. Penn Station was filled with people. Bryce gasped in astonishment as he and the boys climbed up from the subway platform. Flickering torches were everywhere, and groups huddled around fires burning brightly in trash bins. In recent years, more and more homeless people had come to sleep in the semi-warmth of this terminal, but never had the priest seen it filled with refugees. There were so many people, but unlike a normal rush hour, no one was hurrying to catch a train or get to work. These people warmed themselves before fires, or paced nervously, or slept upon the tiled floor. Pardon me. Coyote, who are all these people? Asked Rat. Orphans, Coyote whispered. Rabbits hiding in this hole until the lizards go away. Bryce and the boys wandered for a time. The priest looked into frightened faces, confused faces. He had no words to comfort for these people. He could not think of a thing to say. The priest recognized the traditional bums easily. This is where they came to escape the streets and the weather. But now they shared their quarters with businessmen in soiled suits, with young mothers and their crying children, with old women and their mewing, barking pets. They shared their benches with teachers, made room in their corners for office workers. Suddenly, because of the dinosaurs, everyone was a little more like everyone else. Bryce wondered why it took disasters to bring the crowds together. Just to take a break, holy crap! I didn't realize how reflective of this of today's current culture this is right now. So on we go. He knows a young woman walking aimlessly, carrying a little girl in her arms. The priest watched as she stumbled once, then twice. He reached her just as she stumbled a third time and caught her before she or the little girl could fall. He helped them down, leaning the woman against a wall. Are you all right, miss? Bryce asked. Coyote and Rat stood behind him, unsure of whether they should stay or go. I just need to rest a bit, the woman said. Then she noticed Bryce's collar. Thank you, Father. No trouble at all. The little girl reached out and touched the priest's nose, pushing her tiny finger into the bulbous flesh. Are you a priest? She asked quietly. Yes, I am. I don't go to church. Honey! The young woman protested, but Bryce waved her off. That's all right. Let me tell you a little secret, girl. He leaned closer, like he was going to share something very important with her. She leaned forward to meet him, resting her tiny head against his bald forehead. I'll only go when they make me. The little girl laughed, and her mother smiled at the sound. Do you know what's happening, Father? Do you know when the trains will start running again? Bryce shook his head. He had no answer for the young woman, no words of hope he could spare. Rat produced a pack of gum from one of his many pockets and offered it to the little girl. She looked at it hungrily, then turned a dubious gaze on Rat. Sugarless? She asked. 4 out of 5 doctors recommend it, he answered, and she quickly snatched it away. Coyote, his eyes darting constantly, tapped Bryce on the shoulder. He pointed toward a bench some 20 feet away. Bryce followed his finger and saw a ragged man sitting there. But he was doing more than just sitting. He was shaking uncontrollably. He stood up, a wild look in his eyes, the ragged man walking towards Bryce. As he came forward, he reached up and buried his fist in his thick, unkempt beard. Then he started to pull on it, and Bryce grimaced as just the thought of the pain. But the ragged man seemed to enjoy it, tugging harder as he approached. I am surrounded by corpses, he called out, fixing his gaze on the priest. I am trapped in the land of the dead. Coyote moved to stand in front of Bryce, placing himself between the others and the ragged man. But I have heard Lanala's voice, the ragged man continued as he stopped a few feet from Coyote and Bryce. I hear the song of the jackets sing. They sing of Baruch Ka. They sing of life. What do you want? Bryce asked, trying to move Coyote aside, but the youth would not budge. I want everything, the ragged man said, his voice growing wilder, more guttural. Bryce noticed that he was still tugging on his beard, and the priest could see blood dripping down from the ragged man's fist. I want everything! Now the man began to hunch forward, his limbs seeming to reform as Bryce and Coyote watched. His arms elongated and his legs shortened. Then his face changed. The jaw jutted out, and the bridge of his eyes grew thicker, more pronounced. Everything, he repeated, forcing the word through his crooked teeth. Run, Coyote ordered without turning his head from the ragged man. But Bryce began to argue, but Rat grabbed his arm. Coyote said run, you run, Rat explained, handing the little girl to the priest. Bryce looked at the young woman as she lifted his mask kit. They started to run. They got a little ways when Bryce halted. The young woman looked at him, confusion in her eyes, as he set the little girl down in a deserted corner. He turned to the woman, wanting to lay comforting hands on her shoulder. He couldn't quite get his hands to do that, however. "You'll be safe here," he assured her, awkwardly dropping his arms to his sides. "Where are you going, Father?" "Take care of my mascot," he said, avoiding her question, "and watch out for your little girl." Then he ran back the way he had come, back towards Coyote and Rat. Bryce arrived to find that a crowd had gathered. Many of them were shouting and carrying on in a way that scared the priest. He pushed through the throng, using more strength than he would have expected to. In the center of the crowd was a small, circular clearing, and within that clearing, the ragged man lunged for Coyote. The youth kicked out violently, but the blow seemed to actually amuse the ragged man. He laughed out loud as each punch connected, relishing the sensations that racked his deformed body. Then, quite suddenly, with a speed that caught Coyote off guard, the ragged man's large, hairy hand shot forward. Thick, knobby fingers wrapped tightly around Coyote's arm, and the larger man lifted the youth off the ground. "I bring a gift, little dead thing," the ragged man said, struggling with the words. He squeezed his fist closed, and Coyote screamed in pain. "I give you feelings." He squeezed again, and some of those in the crowd screamed along with their youth. Rat leaped forward upon the ragged man, then beating upon his broad back with small fists. But the ragged man simply flexed his bunch muscles, and Rat was tossed to the hard floor. Before he could regain his breath and move, the ragged man had grabbed him as well. Bryce, desperately trying to decide what to do, noticed that a man standing near him was leaning on a long metal pipe. The pipe was about 3 foot long, probably found somewhere back in the subway tunnel. The man was banging the metal onto the floor, beating it out in an almost tribal tune in time with the ragged man's violence. Without hesitating, the priest snatched the pipe from the surprised man. "This will do nicely," he said lightly, trying to calm his frazzled nerves. The ragged man held on to the two boys at arm's length, smiling savagely over his double catch. "Maybe I will present you as gifts to Lanala, as a sign of my love for the goddess," the ragged man said as he tightened his grip once more. "Maybe not," yelled Bryce as he swung the pipe into the ragged man's brutish face. The sound of the impact was awful as bone and flesh gave way to the unyielding metal. The ragged man crashed to the ground, releasing the two teens as he fell. Bryce dropped the pipe, disgusted at what he had done. He grabbed both boys and shouted, "Now we run!" They did. The woman and the little girl were gone when Bryce and the boys returned. Only Bryce's black mascot sat in the otherwise empty corner, alone. He picked it up and held it close. "She left, man," said Coyote. "We should be going too." The priest nodded, following Coyote and Rat towards the exit. He hesitated a moment, looking back into the empty corner. "We never even found out their names," Bryce said quietly. Rat put his hand on the priest's arm and gently led him away. Chapter 18. Alder carried a small knapsack over one shoulder. The gray cat's head peeked out from the open flap, watching curiously to see where the police officer was taking him. Alder looked back for the 20th time. The lizard man was still following him, ambling along at a steady pace. Tall, too, he had called himself, Alder remembered. Pardon me again. He stopped to rest, leaning against a stalled van. He set the knapsack down and took a moment to study the lizard man. Tall, too, was over 6 feet tall and much bulkier than Alder. His head was reminiscent of a bird's, as the snout tapered to form a sharp beak, but the rest of his body was reptilian, ending in a long tail. He carried a knapsack as well, but he filled his with trinkets from the Radio Shack. What the lizard man wanted with wires and calculators and batteries was beyond him, but Alder hadn't been able to make much out of the happenings of the past 2 days. Ignoring Taltu, Alder decided to check out the van he was resting on. It was a typical two-door model of American make, with a sliding side hatch and a rear door for loading. It was a New York deliveryman's transportation through a crowded city. It guzzled gas and didn't worry about scratches or dents. He tried the door and found it unlocked. Now, that wasn't a smart thing to do in New York. Just about anyone could borrow your vehicle if you left it unlocked and unattended. He slid into the front seat. Surprisingly, the key was still in the ignition. The gear stick was left in drive. So why was it stalled here in the middle of the street? There was a knock on the door window, and Alder jumped when he saw the lizard man face against the glass. Then he held up the knapsack with the cat sticking out of it, and Alder realized it was Tall Two. "You scared yesterday's lunch out of me," Alder yelled, and Tall Two pulled back. He tilted his bird's head to one side so he could guard Alder with one of his lizard eyes. "Don't give me that innocent look. You shouldn't sneak up on a person like that." The ground shook then, throwing Alder into the van and tilting Tall Two back on his tail. "What the Udatak, Rick Alder? Udatak," Tall Two rasped, motioning down the street. Alder glanced back and saw the huge monster. It was another one of the one-horned dinosaurs. Each step it took shook the ground. There were lizard men with it, and the people who had changed, and the flying starfish. The invaders were coming, and Alder could not escape them on foot. He grabbed the knapsack from Tall Two and placed it in the back of the van. Then he led Tall Two around to the sliding hatch. There were no seats in the rear, just an empty cargo space. "Get in," he ordered, helping Tall Two squeeze his bulk and strange shape into the van. It wouldn't have been comfortable, but Alder felt that if he left the lizard man behind, the others would kill him. Then Alder piled into the driver's seat. He shifted to the park and grasped the key. There was no reason for this van not to work, he told himself. It had gas. He had the key. That was all you needed to make it start. That was all the way the world worked that Rick Alder knew. He glanced into the rearview mirror and saw the approaching horde. They were to be upon him momentarily, and that Udatak, or whatever Tall Two had called it, would crush them beneath its scaled feet. Alder turned the key, willing the engine to start. It sputtered and died. He pumped the gas pedal and turned the key again. "Come on, baby, you can do it." This time the van started. Alder silently thanked God as he gunned the engine and drove forward, away from the horrors that were chasing him. Chapter 19. Sergeant Dystra stared out the windshield of the Jeep, hoping to see some sign of civilization come rumbling down Route 17. All he saw were the sheets of driving rain. The rain started shortly after nightfall. He and Wilson had hurriedly put up the canvas top, hoping that the flimsy covering would keep them dry. Now the gray sky was brightening, and still rain was falling. It swept across the blacktop of the highway in great waves of water, forming small rivers and ponds as far as he could see. Beside him, Wilson slept. His snores were loud inside the Jeep, but Dystra didn't complain. For all he knew, he sounded the same when he was asleep. Maybe worse. Dystra clutched the ignition key for the 70th time in the last hour. He rolled the cool metal between his thumb and fingers absently, his eyes fixed upon the sweeping rain. He turned the key, hoping to hear the engine turn over, or cough, or sputter. All he heard was Wilson's insistent snoring and the hammering rain. Dystra sighed and leaned back in the seat. He let his eyes close, let the sound of the rain lull him to sleep. Time passed and the sounds changed. Dystra's eyes blinked open. The rain had stopped, but the day was still dark and gray. Wilson was still asleep beside him, snoring away. But outside, there was something happening in the clouds. Dystra watched as the clouds roiled. They split open and something fell from the sky. It was a plant of some sort. It grew out of the clouds, its vines and tendrils twisting, intertwining, sneaking their way towards the ground. Finally, the roots struck home, shattering the pavement of the highway to seek the soft dirt beneath. The sergeant wasn't aware that this plant bridge was much smaller than the one that landed in Queens. He didn't know that the others just like it had sprouted from the sky throughout a 300-mile triangle that stretched from east and north from New York City. He didn't understand the huge number of lizards and dinosaurs that were even now pouring down those many bridges, spreading their forces, taking control. Dystra and Wilson were sent to find out what their unit would have had to face in the silent zone. Now Dystra knew, even if he couldn't warn his unit, he was trapped in the silent zone, cut off from communications. The dinosaurs swept down the plant bridge, an unending force of armored lizards and winged reptiles. One of the larger beasts noticed the tiny jeep. The creature was tall and stood on its hind legs. It flailed a spiked tail behind it and snapped its powerful jaws. Then it moved, more quickly than Dystra expected, and closed the distance between the bridge and the jeep with great, powerful strides. "Wilson!" Sergeant said, shaking the corporal. "Wake up, Wilson!" What the... My God!" Wilson started screaming again. Then, and Dystra immediately regretted his action. Perhaps he should have left the corporal asleep. Then the great beast ripped through the canvas roof. Dystra raised his pistol towards the snapping maw. He pulled the trigger once, twice, 3 times, but like the jeep in the radio, the pistol didn't work. A wave of disappointment rushed through the sergeant. Not that he expected the pistol to stop the monster, but he did want the satisfaction of shooting it before it killed him. Then the jaw snapped over him, plucking him from the jeep. His screams joined Wilson's, but the screams didn't last long. Bravo and Charlie companies joined up where 415 and 17 met, just outside of Kanoa. They had not heard from the reconnaissance unit, so they proceeded cautiously, but they did proceed. When the soldiers had gone another 15 miles, they spotted the enemy. Through binoculars with naked eyes, the National Guard units studied the shapes on the horizon. There were giant lizards and reptiles of all descriptions. The creatures were arranged in a deep line that stretched to each side and as far back as the soldiers could see. They shook in place, excitedly swaying back and forth, but they made no sound. The radio man called in their position, describing the scene before them. He could hear the skepticism on the other end, but he proceeded with his report anyway. He told them about the dinosaurs. The National Guardsmen checked out their weapons. On command, they started forward. Then the storm began. The rain swept from behind the dinosaurs, soaking the soldiers with pelting drops of dark water. Behind the rain, following in its wake, was a wave of glowing energy. It rolled over the soldiers, knocking them to the ground as it passed on. In the first moments after the reality storm, a number of the soldiers began to change. They became brutal, bestial, more Neanderthal than Homo sapiens. They tore at their uniforms and howled out their savage passions. The lizard men roared without an answer, letting their hissing voices join those of the transformed soldiers. Then the lizards slithered forward. Then the attack began. The soldiers who didn't succumb to the reality storm were confused, but they composed themselves as best they could and readied their weapons. They pulled triggers and tossed grenades. Except for an occasional gun burst, the modern weapons did not respond. Some of the men hefted their useless weapons as clubs. Some continued to pull the triggers that did not respond. Others turned and ran. None of them escaped the lizard men. Chapter 20. The world called Canandra never ceased to amaze Thrachin. He walked its neon streets beneath its neon signs, just another face in the crowd. As long as he kept his hat pulled low and his raincoat closed tight, they took no notice of him. They called him and his kind Sims, being those who were similar to the people of Canandra, beings who operated under a similar reality. But the Sims were from another dimension, and they wanted this world and its energy for themselves. Thrachin paused in the dark alley, cloaking himself in deep shadows. He rolled the right sleeve of his coat up to his elbow, exposing a metallic arm. 2 taps on his right wrist, and a small flap of thin metal snapped open, revealing a tiny screen and an input port. He connected his left pinky jack to the port, and the screen came to life, displaying alien markings on its illuminated face. Time was passing faster than he anticipated. He had so much to do, and he was among the last of the Sims still on Canandra. These people were fighters, he had to admit. They were ready for Thrachen's master. When the Maelstrom bridges crashed across the dimensions, they found warriors prepared to fight off the raiders, not sheep ripe for conquest as was the usual case. The Gauntman would not be pleased by the master's failure here, for it meant that the master would be delayed from rendezvousing with other High Lords on a world called Earth. But Thrachen decided he would win at least a small victory for his master. If he had to be trapped upon this world, he would make the most of it. He would find the little brat that warned the raiders of the raiders coming. He would find her and have his revenge. He checked his screen once more and read the name that appeared there. Dr. Hachi Mara II. He would make her death a slow one. That he promised his faraway master. Chapter 21. Coyote led Bryce to the entrance of the Lincoln Tunnel. Stalled vehicles were here and there, but because of the time of day when the storm hit, there were far less than there could have been. There were no people around, but Bryce felt as though he was being watched. He shook the notion and examined the tunnel's entrance. The dark, lightless mall was uninviting, and it only added to his unease. "Kind of like walking in a lion's mouth," commented Rat. Coyote turned to the priest. "You saved me back there. You saved Rat. I owe you, Father." Bryce shook his head. "No, Coyote, you don't owe me a thing. You have done more for me than I would have expected. If you don't want to go any further, I will try not to talk you into it." "Sorry?" The priest sat down heavily upon a concrete curb. His sigh was loud, pained. "What's the matter, Father?" Rat asked as he sat beside the priest. "I never hit a man before," Bryce said in a quivering voice, "especially not with such violent intent. My God, I may have killed him." He buried his face in his hands and wept. "But Father Bryce, you saved Coyote and me. If you didn't hit that spaced-out dude, we'd both be pretty dead right now." "That doesn't excuse my actions, Rat. It only makes them necessary." "Father Bryce, we got company," Coyote whispered. Trying not to move suddenly or give on that he had noticed anything out of the ordinary. The priest looked up and his eyes followed the tilt of the teen's head. There, perched upon the tunnel's arch, was a winged reptile. It observed him warily, its yellow eyes upon them. Bryce stood slowly, and the reptile spread his feathered wings. It squawked once, twice. Its call was answered by a cacophony of similar squawks and the beating of dozens of pairs of wings. More of the reptiles appeared in the sky, swooping down to land upon the retaining walls that surrounded the tunnel entrance. "Come on, boys," Bryce urged. "We have to get out of here." "What are they, Father?" Rat asked. Coyote could hear the fear in his voice. "It doesn't matter. All that matters is we reach the tunnel. Then we'll be safe." "Will we, Father Bryce?" Coyote questioned as more of the reptile birds landed around them. "Will we?" Bryce had no answer for the young man. He only had a goal. Run for the tunnel. Now. Chapter 22. She was calm, peaceful. The pain was gone. She had left it behind her, along with the fear, back in a place that was nothing more than a fading memory. She tried to focus on where she was now, but nothing was familiar. She was floating, alone in a featureless area, but it was warm, serene. The danger was past, she knew. She knew that, but she could not remember what the danger was. There was a sound, music of some sort. Majestic, she thought. The music was majestic and beautiful, so beautiful. She could float here forever, she decided. It was so different from the fading place, so comfortable. But the comfort was short-lived. Another sound began, drowning out the music with its awful buzzing. She tried to block it out, but the buzzing was insistent, penetrating. Suddenly, it became the worst pain she had ever experienced, even worse than what she had left behind. She became aware of something else, a dark space nearby. It drifted closer, touching her, pawing her with coldness that brushed away the warmth. The darkness smelled of carrion, and she tried to push it off. Tendrils of darkness brushed lingeringly across her eyes, blinding her. Wisps of the stuff entered her nose and mouth, choking her, gagging her with their cloying, foul sweetness. The dark space flowed in front of her, around her, tripping her, slowing her aimless travel. A breeze blew gently from within the dark space, filling her senses with images of deep, damp earth strongly spiced with bits and pieces of decomposing vegetation. The dark space became a tunnel, and she felt herself drifting through it, into it, falling. She screamed, but the sound was lost among the other echoes. There were the vibrations of memory, echoes of a life that was and was no more. Then the descent began. She was dropping, faster and faster, rushing through the dark tunnel towards a destination she could not fathom. As she whipped through the darkness, she felt clean cobwebs tear away. She caught glimpses of dark figures, shadowy forms that she thought she recognized, but they seemed angry, vengeful, reaching for her as she flew past. Still she fell, moving at a speed she never experienced before. It was exhilarating and frightening at the same time. Then she saw a light. It seemed out of place in the dark space, dim, but it quickly grew ineffably clear. It was brilliant, compelling. It was the source of warmth and peace. And as she drew closer to the coldness of the dark space, receded and was gone. Then the falling stopped. Ahead of her was the light. Beyond the light, as compelling in its own way, the dark space loomed, continuing on towards its deep source. The light sparkled, and she imagined a gentle smile. But the dark space reached out with its spidery wisps, and she started to drift again, caught in its unrelenting pull. No, she said, but wondered why not as the pull weakened. Not yet, she said. And the light increased in its brilliance, and she knew that this was so. For the moment, the pull had ceased. Chapter 23. Alder drove the van as fast as he could, while still being able to navigate around the semi-block streets. The two unlikely companions rode in silence. Alder had long since stopped trying to make conversation with the lizard man, and not even the static could be coaxed out of the radio's band. English. I speak it well. Give me a couple of seconds here. Alder had long since stopped trying to make conversation with the lizard man, and not even static could be coaxed out of the van's radio. The police officer ignored the sights beyond the van's windows. He focused all of his concentration on the task at hand. It was like driving on an obscene obstacle course. Not only did Alder have to deal with the stalled cars, he had to avoid transformed pedestrians and the occasional dinosaur that ran into the road or stood over it. But at least he had a goal now, and a method for achieving that goal. "Hang on, Tall-Too," he said, more just to hear a voice than to inform the lizard. "I think you'll like New Jersey. It's probably a lot like wherever you're from." They finally reached the turnoff. Alder slowed even more. The turn onto the Lincoln Tunnel approach was tricky under normal conditions. With unmoving cars hidden around the blind curve, it was downright hazardous. Delikis Rick Alder, Taltu rasped as they completed the turn. Alder pressed down on the brake and brought the van to a halt. Winged reptiles covered the approach all the way to the tunnel entrances. Each creature was about 4 foot tall, with snake-like bodies and large feathered wings. Each had long, skinny legs which ended in sharp talons. They had no arms, but 2 venomous fangs dripped from their small snake heads. Alder turned to look at Taltu, who was curled up in the back of the van. The gray cat was resting on the lizard man's lap. Deckless? He asked. Deckless, Taltu answered. If it's not one thing, it's another. Alder gunned the engine and the van rolled forward. The delics that did not fly off were crushed beneath the van's wheel. Progress was messy, and Alder could feel bile rising in the back of his throat as each delic crunched under the van's weight, but at least they were moving in the right direction. A bang sounded on the right side of the van, then another. Some of the delics were attacking the vehicles, smashing at it with their claw feet. Alder simply stepped on the gas, ignoring the creatures. A flock of the winged beasts flew into the windshield with a dull thud. They attacked the glass with claw and fang, trying to reach Alder with unrelenting fury. There was a crack, and the police officer saw lines from one corner of the windshield. He swerved the vehicle violently to the left, then turned sharply to the right. A number of the delics fell away, but there were still enough that he could not see. He clicked the windshield wipers on it, and the sudden motion caused a few more to fly off, but the most persistent ones were still blocking his view. Damn stubborn lizards, Alder cursed. Let's see if you like this. He hit the horn, and a loud blare scattered the remaining creatures. Now Alder could see again, and standing directly in his path were 3 figures. He quickly hit the brake, and the van skidded to a stop within feet of the trio. One was a priest, or at least he was dressed that way. The other 2 were kids, decked out in gang colors. Somehow, Taltu, I think I'm going to regret this. Taltu said nothing. He simply stroked his cat, trying to ease the terror it felt due to the delics. Alder glanced to each side. He saw that the delics were regaining their courage. They would attack again soon. He reached over and opened the passenger side door for the trio. Move it! We don't have all day! Chapter 24. Andrew Jackson Decker sat in the hallway. The session was still going strong, but he needed to get away for a few minutes. So much has happened in 3 short days. And there was so much that they still didn't know. What was going on in New York? Where was the president? Was he alive? And behind these immediate questions were the unspoken questions that gnawed at his heart. Why did Vicky have to die? Why? There were too many blasted whys and not enough becauses in Decker's life these days. He didn't like mysteries or puzzles that refused to yield solutions. They just didn't fit into his game plan. The door to the meeting chamber opened and a woman stepped out. Decker looked up. It was Senator Ellen Connors, the middle-aged matron of the Senate, who did not look matronly at all. She had been in the Senate for as long as Decker could remember, and she had to be in her 50s, but she was still a fine figure of a woman. Decker could only imagine what she must have been like in her younger days. Her raven black hair was styled short and had only a hint of gray, and her clothes were nothing but conservative, but on Connors the effect was striking. She sat behind him, resting her head against the wall. She suddenly looked as tired as Decker felt, and he wondered why everyone on the hill called her the old lady Medusa. He had little cause to interact with her since he had come to Washington, but he had met her a few times at various functions. Her reputation, however, made Decker cautious. Ellen Connors, everyone said, was no one to be taken lightly. So, Congressman, she said at last, what are your opinions on this? Opinions? Decker started. He hadn't formed any yet, but the senator obviously wanted to hear something. What can I base an opinion on, Senator? New York and much of the Northeast have been cut off from the rest of the country. The president and the vice president are somewhere within the area of silence. Rumors of invaders are starting to trickle in. My opinion is that we need more information to base an opinion on. She turned to look at Decker, a slight smile upon her face. You don't understand, do you, my dear young man? We must make the opinions so that the rest of the country knows what to think. That is our duty as elected representatives. Even when we don't have any solid information, that, Mr. Decker, is precisely the time when our opinions are needed most. The door to the meeting chamber opened again, and a clerk stuck his head out. Senator, Congressman, I think you might want to see this. Decker rose to his full height of 6'2". What's going on? The Speaker of the House has called for a quiet so that he addressed the assembly. Decker and Connors entered the chamber, each going their separate ways. He found his seat as Jonathan Wells stepped to the podium. The Speaker of the House waited until the last murmurs had died down. Then he tested the microphone and spoke. Distinguished members of Congress, we need more information before we can come to any firm policies regarding this crisis. But I have decided on one thing. I will not be named president at this time. There is not enough evidence in either direction to allow me to take such a definite and final action. We owe President Douglas Kent and Vice President Gregory Farrell too much to write them off this soon. Wells paused to sip from a glass beside the podium. He replaced the glass, scanned the crowd, then continued. I will, however, take over the duties of the executive office in President Kent's absence. The country needs firm direction at this time, and it's my duty and obligation to provide that direction. In this regard, I have placed our armed forces on DEFCON 2. That is all I have to say. If we could hear from the Defense Committee at this time. Decker leaned back into his chair and let the voices fade out around him. There was so much to do, so much to decide. Here was Congress doing what it did best, talking up a storm. At least President Wells wasn't ready to write off the president and vice president just yet. What was going on in New York? He wished he knew. Chapter 25. Dr. Kendall Alec IV input his finger jack into the port of his apartment door. His personal computer recognized the command signal, and the front door slid open. Alec entered the apartment, but paused in the vestibule. For some reason, the lights had not brightened the room like they should have. If this computer had crashed again, I'm going to... A strong, possibly cyber-enhanced hand shot out of the darkness and closed around Alex's throat. The scientist found himself held fast against the wall, his feet dangling a good half a meter off the ground. Don't struggle, Dr. Kendall, warned a calm, composed voice. It was the voice of someone accustomed to causing pain as a matter-of-fact routine. I require a small amount of data that I know you're going to provide me with. Alec tried to speak, but he couldn't draw any breath. Let me make you more comfortable, Dr. Kendall, said the formless voice as the hand loosened his grip ever so slightly. Or may I call you Alec? Who are you? What do you want? You are the Dr. Kendall Alec IV that was involved in the Cosmverse project, are you not? Of course you are. Now, I understand that the leader of that project was a child prodigy of some sort. A regular genius, I am told. But the closest I could come to finding her in the computer net was you. Where is she, Alec? Mara? What do you want with Mara? Mara. The voice rolled her name in its mouth as though it was a fine wine. I want to meet this Mara. I want to introduce myself to the genius that figured out we were coming to this pitiful cosm. Alec gasped, and his heart grew cold. You're Sim! I am thrashing you, virus! The voice exclaimed, threatening. I want to reward this Mara for her brilliant work. Then I want to rip her beating heart from her pretty little chest. Alec heard the snap of an I/O jack extending from a recessed cavity. "What are you doing?" he asked as he saw the jack extend towards his head. "That's illegal." "Illegal?" Thrachin laughed evilly. "You have data I need filed somewhere in your pathetic system. I will simply search through your memories until I find it. Of course, it won't be very pleasant for you. I do imagine that what's left of your mind after I sort it won't be worth very much. But then that's life." Thrachin jacked into the port under Alec's right ear. Then he tightened his grip on Alec's throat so that no screams could escape the scientist's lips. And Alec very badly wanted to scream. Chapter 26. Bryce sat in the passenger seat, next to the driver who wore remnants of a police officer's uniform. Behind him in the van's cargo port, Coyote and Rat sat across from a lizard man. The lizard man eyed the two boys curiously, while he absently petted a large gray cat wearing a red collar. The boys, fighting over whether to be scared or curious themselves, sat with their backs against the van wall, as far from the lizard as possible. There had been little discussion since they piled into the vehicle. For one thing, the priest and the teens had been glad to get away from the winged reptiles, and they had been totally surprised to see a van that actually worked. For another thing, the cop was too busy navigating through the Lincoln Tunnel to answer any questions. Every so often they'd reach an impasse, and the van had to squeeze through a narrow opening or push another vehicle aside and out of the way. The winged reptiles followed them as far as the daylight penetrated the tunnel, but refused to venture further into the darkness. That suited Bryce and the others just fine. The priest wiped the rain from his beard. "Thank you for your timely assistance, officer. I'm Father Christopher Bryce. And these two young men are Coyote and Rat. We are in your debt." The police officer examined the priest with quick glances, never letting his eyes leave the road ahead for more than an instant. "I'm Rick Alder, and I'm not sure if the NYPD still exists for me to be a member of. But I guess once a cop, always a cop, huh? The big guy in the back is tall, too. He helped me out of a jam, so I decided to keep him." Alder swerved to avoid a stalled Honda, straightened out the van, and continued on an even path. "Do you have any idea what this is all about, Father?" Alder asked. "If only I knew the answer to that question," Bryce sighed. "I've heard it quite a few times since this all began. But how about you hoodlums? What are you two doing wandering around in the rain with a priest?" Rat started to say something, but Coyote silenced him with a pat on his head. "We don't talk to cops, man," Coyote spat. "Suit yourself, but if you give me any lip, I'll let Tall Two eat your face off." Coyote paled visibly, and Rat huddled behind him. "You are kidding, aren't you?" asked Bryce quietly. Alex smiled nastily. "What do you think?" Tall Two, pleased by all the attention, opened his jaws wide and exposed a mean set of teeth. An hour later, Alder had the van running smoothly along I-95 south. Rain was still falling, but was much less intense than it had been. They were approaching the Newark exit when Bryce noticed a warm glow off to the right. He sat up in his seat and peered out to the horizon. The glow extended for some distance to each side. It was a natural light, without the coldness of artificial illumination. It took a few seconds, but when it registered, Bryce's mind went into panic mode. "Also, Alder, there's a fire out there." Smoke hung in the air, thick clouds of black that darkened an already gray sky. Alder could see the red and orange glow of a crackling fire. It had to be a large, intense blaze to create such a display. "Get off here," the priest ordered. "Maybe we can help." The police officer maneuvered the van onto the exit ramp. The Newark skyline came into view and was burning brightly. "My God, Bryce," Alder said. "The city's on fire." At the edge of the ramp, he had to stop the van, for the road was filled with people. They were everywhere, spilling out of the city to escape the intense heat. And worst of all, they were all dead. "Look at the soot and burns," Bryce's voice cracked as he spoke. But the fire didn't kill these people. Their chests. My God, look at their chests. Indeed, each man, woman, and child had an empty, bloody hole where their chests were once. Alder remembered the scene at the 59th Street Bridge, and he had to visibly force his stomach to stay down. "Itinos do this," Taltu said, startling both Adler and Bryce with the words. "Itinos jackets." Bryce grabbed his mask kit from the floor by his feet and opened the van door. "Where are you going, Father?" Alder asked. "To do my job," he said, and he stepped out into the mass of dead bodies. Alder, Taltu, and the two boys watched the priest go from body to body. They listened to the prayers of last rites over and over again, until the priest's voice grew raw and only the light of the nearby fire illuminated the night. Chapter 27. Captain Nikolai Ondarov made his way through the polished hallways of an unmarked building in a run-down section of Moscow. He entered a small, sparingly furnished office and flashed his ID to a portly woman sitting behind the only desk. She studied the identification briefly, then nodded toward a nondescript door. Remember, this was put out in 1990, so the Soviet Union was still there. So the Soviet officer pushed through the door and found himself at the top of a stairwell. It appeared to lead down several stories below the ground. He glanced back at the woman, but her back was to him. She had done her job, he realized. Now he must do this. He started down the steps. After he traveled down more flights of stairs than he ever cared to travel again, Ondarev reached the bottom landing. There he found a heavy metal door. It, too, was unmarked. Before he could knock, the door opened. A middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform met him, nodded, and motioned him to follow. He did not disappoint her. The nurse showed the captain into a small room that smelled of hospital and circulated air. There was a child's desk and chair in one corner. A globe of the world sat atop the desk. A small bed rested against the far wall, and beside it was a hard-backed chair. The nurse left the room, closing the door behind her so that the captain would be alone with the room's two occupants. The first, a man in a white smock, rose from his chair to greet the officer, but the captain ignored the man. His attention was clearly focused upon the young woman lying in the bed. She was young, perhaps 20, perhaps less, and she was stunning. But her beauty had nothing to do with makeup or fashion, for she wore no makeup and her clothing was but a simple hospital gown. Her hair was the color of radiant sunshine, and her eyes were pools of light blue water that stared into nothing, but seemed to see everything. "Welcome to Project Omen, Captain Ondarov. I am Dr. Kazan," the man in the smock said, trying to get the officer's attention. "And this is Katerina Tovarich, the one you have come to see." The captain continued to look at the young woman. After all these years, was this slip of a young thing the accumulation of all the work and money the government had poured into the development of psychic research? And even if she was, could she really help them? He took the globe from the desk and studied it for a moment. It was mounted within a thin curved arm so that it could spin freely. He placed the globe in the young woman's hand, then bent down beside the bed and whispered into her ear. "What do you see, Katerina Tovarich?" "Captain, I'm afraid you don't understand," the doctor told him. "Katerina is quite blind." The officer fixed on Dr. Kazan with deadly stare, and then repeated his question to the young woman. He said the words very gently. "What did you see?" In a haunting voice that Captain Ondarev would never forget, the young woman said, "I saw the storm clouds gather over the earth. I saw the dark rain fall. There are 7 raiders coming, 7 invaders to attack Earth, 7 different places to be attacked." She has been experiencing this vision for several months now, the doctor explained. I reported it to your superiors each time, and each time I was dismissed. I am here now, doctor, said Ondarov. Please do not interrupt us again. Katerina. May I call you Katerina? Again the haunting voice spoke. You may, Captain. And might I add, you have a very nice name. I have always liked the name Nikolai. Ondarov could not remember using his first name since he entered the room, but he must have, he reasoned, for her to know it. He dismissed the mystery and went back with his questions. Where are these invasions going to occur, Katerina? He tilted her head to one side, as though she was listening to a faraway voice. Then she began to spin the globe, letting her fingers run across its textured surface. Here, she said, pointing to Borneo, without looking where her fingers struck. Here, her finger tapped New York. Here, 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 Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union. Here and here and here. Her finger pointed to Egypt and Japan. Captain Ondarov stood up and wiped perspiration from his brow. He took the globe from Katerina and held it so he could look at it. The outline of his beloved country stared back at him. She had touched the globe where there was there with her fifth tap. That meant there was still time. Captain, the storm has already begun, she added, and the invaders are falling to our world along with its poisonous rain. Prepare her, doctor, Ondarov ordered briskly. She is to leave with me. Why? The Grasser questioned nervously. I don't understand. What is happening? We have lost all contact with Singapore and its Indonesian neighbors, and the United States has come under attack by unknown forces. Don't you see? Her storm has begun. And I will need her to help if our country is going to survive. As Ondarov moved to leave the room, Katerina's haunting voice stopped him. The storm has a name, Captain Nikolai Ondarov. He forced himself to look at the young woman, even though his sweat was now running cold. It calls itself Torg. Time to go, time to go, time to go, streamed the redly, blinking across the inside of her closed left eye. Irritatedly, she opened her eyes. The alarm display continued to flash and stream across her vision as she looked out about the room. Faint, ghost-like images leaking backwards from the sense-over chip in the first socket behind her right ear. Even though her brain, optic nerves, and to her retinas, overlay the hard reality of the sleeping portion of her in her living cubicle. She blinked her left eye once, turning off the alarm display and activating the snooze control. That would let her go back to sense-over for 10 more minutes before the alarm roused her again. The cubicle faded from her vision, and the translucent images became solid as she closed her eyes and returned to experiencing a recording of the Chios City Philharmonic playing Hartzell's post-invasion symphony with herself playing first piano. Atonal bass vibrations trembled in the tips of her fingers when they pressed down upon the polished white plastic of the keys, and the attenuator pedal quivered under her foot as she floated back into the sense-over scene. She was just getting to her solo when a voice came through the intercom panel near her door. The voice intruded on the music and spoke her name questioningly. Dr. Hachi? The voice of the security doorman 47 floors below asked. Triple damn, she muttered to herself as she sat up in the bed and pulled out the sense-over chip of the symphony. She tossed it onto the counter that ran the length of the room, letting it mix with a jumble of electronic equipment, papers, books, program chips, and data disks that littered the surface. What? She asked as she had slid off the bed and pushed the speak button on intercom. Noting her absence, the bed retreated into its wall slot. Your driver is here for you, Dr. Hachi. Where? She said. Garage level 5, stall 23. Okay, tell him I'll be down as soon as I can. Sure thing. Dr. Hachi? Yes? Good luck, Mara. Mentally paralyzed for a moment with the thought of luck and how much of that elusive, randomly indeterminate substance it would take to save a world, she made no answer to the doorman's last remark. Then, thinking that even if she could not calculate nor mathematically define luck, only the probability of it, she was going to need all of it that she could get. Thanks, Randon 6. Randy. Nothing of it, Mara. Carry your bags up when you get back? Back. The words echoed in the shadowy, fear-filled corners of her mind. Back. Step off into the communism verse and back again. Just like that. Nothing to it. Yeah, sure. See you, Randy, she said and took her finger off the speak button. Chapter 29. In sheer reptilian pleasure, Baruch Ka hissed his approval. The new tribe members were making excellent progress. They used their hands to dig shallow holes through this field that they once called Central Park. Into each 6 paces by 3 paces by 1 arm's length deep hole was laid a gospog seed. Then one of the dead of this world was placed into each hole, taken from the growing field piles that lined the edge of the field. Off to the High Lord's left, another pile of bodies was carted in atop a dinosaur with a large flat back. After it deposited its gruesome cargo, it trundled back to reload. Baruch Ka looked to the field again, eager to watch his hand-picked master planters firmly tamp the loose earth back into the holes, sealing the seeds and the bodies in place. Further along the row of holes, a new member of Baruch Ka's tribe dug enthusiastically. He wore dark blue slacks and a light blue shirt that had a New York City Transit Authority patch on his left sleeve, and he moved in a rolling, chimpanzee-like gait. His uniform, his mirror-finished sunglasses, and his clean-shaven face looked out of place as he hunched over to dig another hole. Baruch Ka tilted his head upward and inhaled deeply. As he exhaled, he closed the flap in his nasal passages and diverted his exhalation through the hollow, elongated and U-shaped bony structure that ran from his nostrils, passing up the center of his face and arching at the top of his head. The trumpeting he made was a salute to the planters and diggers. The workers looked up from where they squatted and roared in response to the High Lord's praise. "What is your crop?" Baruch Ka asked hissingly of the Adinos planter nearest him. "These are the gospogs of the first planting Tsar," the planter said. At the same time, he kept track of the carelessly swinging, sharply ridged tail of the High Lord. It had been known to stiffly strike if the Tsar was displeased. "In 7 suns, you will have an army of gospogs to march at your back." "How long before we see the gospogs of the 5th planting?" The answer came not from the planter, but from the Ravagon that landed nearby. "When you win more land for the planting, Baruch Ka. Then will the gaunt man's gifts truly bear fruit. Soon, Ravagon, soon." Baruch Ka turned away from the demon and looked back at the workers in the field. He addressed the planter. "You have enough workers?" The master planter scanned the field. "Yes," he answered. "More than natives are joining us all the time." "The gaunt man planned well," said Baruch Ka so that the Ravagon could hear, giving grudging respect to the demon's master, who looked like the soft-skinned, easily crushed natives of this cosm, but who truly thought and acted as an Adinos. "Grow well, planter," the High Lord said as he made his leave, not bothering to say anything to the Ravagon. On the island of Borneo, a new reality held sway. Gone were the laws of Earth, replaced by the axioms of Orosh. In the island's dark interior, a writhing bridge constructed of tortured bodies spanned an expanse from sky to ground. Beside the bridge, a small town had been constructed hastily, though to look at it one would believe it had been in place for ages. The town lay clouded under the gray pall of burning coals and wood. Its cobbled streets were made odorous from the droppings of horses that pulled an incessant flow of carriages, delivery wagons, and hansom cabs. At the town's center, rising slightly over the other buildings, was a walled estate. To the general public of Arosh, this was Salisbury Manor, but to the lord of the estate, it was Ilmond Keep. Within the walls of the estate was a 4-storied manor house, pointed, domed, and open-topped towers, which were round, square, oval, and slanted, stabbed at the sky. Crenellated walkways arced and connected the towers or ended halfways into nothingness. Gable ends, held in the arms of massive stone gargoyles, who crouched upon the peaks of the slate roofs, jutted outward at every conceivable angle. Windows, dark and lighted, of thin scraped horn and oiled vellum, of glass that was cut and stained and cleared, looked out upon the rolling lawns and the black, gnarled forests of the estate. Dormers wept from the eaves and down the sides of the manor house, and here and there a buttress flew. In a room on the top floor of the manor house, a room paneled in heavy, dark wood and walled in shelves of leather-bound books, stood the hunter called Cursed. He stood with his back to the darkly green upholstered furniture and the massive oak desk. The room was lit by the yellow, softly hissing flames of a brass and crystal gas lamp hanging from the tin-paneled ceiling. He stood looking out at the leaded glass, diamond-paned window down into the gardens below, tracing out with his eyes the intricate patterns of the hedge maze that dominated the west lawn of the estate. Carefully, as though he were actually walking on the crushed gravel, his eyes followed the angled and curved path. So as not to mar the challenge, he avoided looking at the center of the maze, the small open square that held the prize for anyone who could win their way there. Yesterday, when the gardeners had rerouted the maze, they had chained a young woman, one of the dark-skinned maidens native to the island, to the iron bench at the center of the open square. Cursed calmly drank some of the heavy burgundy from the crystal wine glass he held. He almost had the pattern solved, and soon he would go down into the west lawn, enter the maze, make his way through its winding, deceptive path, and take the prize that the gaunt man had provided for him. He had never failed to take whatever prize was set out for him. He did not know if the gaunt man knew of this vantage point in the slanting west tower that allowed an overview of the maze below, nor did he care. He finished the wine and set the empty glass down on the tray next to a half-filled decanter. He was turning away from the window when a hesitant knock came to the other side of the door. "Yes?" called Cursed. The high-buttoned tweed suit that he wore, although obviously rich cloth and careful tailoring, looked out of place and ill-suited on the hunter. He slightly pointed his ears and elongated eyes that angled perceptibly upwards at the outside corners did little to take away from the wildness of his appearance. "Sir, it is I, Picard. The master wishes to see you," the voice said from the other side of the door. "Very well," replied Curse, letting fall to pieces the pattern he had held in his mind. Through the glass of the window at Curse's back, faintly came the sound of a wolf howling as he hunted somewhere in the black forest of the estate. The hair on the nape of Curse's neck stood on end, and the fingers of his hands curled tautly. How he longed to join the wolf, but that would come later. He had left the room, making his way past the manservant, and padded silently through the shadowy corridors of the manor house. Amazingly, Curse thought, that none of the sheep could see the manor for what it truly was. If they could, he was certain that none of them would ever step into its dark shadow, let alone cross its arched entryways. He made his way down to the underground levels where the gaunt man worked in his laboratory. As he passed the windowed gallery that looked out on the eastern grounds of the estate, he glanced at the maelstrom bridge that stretched out into the sky. The bridge led back to his world, back to the cosmos of Orosh. He pulled his gaze from the writhing bridge and continued on. Why dwell on the past, he decided, for if he read the gaunt man's plan correctly, none of them would ever see their home world again. Down in the lowest level of the manor house, where the bedrock was the floor and the water of the land wept through it the fitted stone blocks of the manor's deep foundations, Curtis pushed open the iron-studded door to the chamber that was the workshop of the gaunt man. Curtis slid sideways into the room and stood silently, unmoving in the shadows. At the far end of the room, hunched, deformed creatures shoveled coal into a gigantic furnace that filled a significant portion of the chamber. Steam whistled and turbines whined. Generators turned and the harsh yellow light of incandescent bulbs washed over the strange machinery and over three figures. Curse moved forward into the shadow of a stone pillar that supported the high ceiling of the chamber. He watched two of the figures as they moved about the third, where it lay strapped to an altar-like stone table. From it, they were cruelly pierced the chest of the man on the table. Two short shafts pointed upwards and at outward angles. The shafts were about 2 feet long and 1 inch in diameter. All the colors that Kurst had ever seen shifted and flowed along the edges of these shafts. Words in an ancient arcane script, and bathed in flowing colors spiraled around each shaft. The man was the stormer that Kurst had hunted in the jungle, the sheep that, in its final moment, had found its claws. Kurst knew the ends of the shaft in the stormer's chest were pointed and barbed. The outer ends were knobbled and sheathed in brass. At intervals that grew further and further apart, bursts of energy coruscated from the brass knobs and dissipated into the damp air of the chamber, into the machine. Beyond the stone table was an assemblage of spinning flywheels, turning cams, arcing electrical sparks, and gauges with bouncing indicator needles. It spanned a quarter of the room and reached halfway to the shadows near the ceiling. Kurst heard the gaunt man speaking to the large man standing beside him at the side of the stone table. This is the last and the bravest of them, Skythak, and the strongest. Look at him now, shuddering in his flesh and cringing in his spirit. Stormers, rumbled Skythak, scornfully as he grabbed one of the rods and twisted. The stormer arched his back and screamed. Careful, Skythak, chuckled the gaunt man. You might lose a part of yourself. I do not fear these runes, said Skythak, indicating the rods protruding from the stormer's chest. Nor do I fear that machine which makes them work. You should. Look what they have done to this stormer, the gaunt man said as he pointed to the suffering man. And to Kurst, that weakling. Why do you keep him around? Kill him or send him back to the moors where he belongs. He serves me well. Now let's see what more we can get from this one. The gaunt man moved to this machine, adjusted some of the rheostats and some of the dials. The raw smell of burnt flesh and ozone reached where Kurst stood, and the fear of the rods and the machine started his shape-shifting. The fingers of his left hand lengthened, the nails grew into claws, and dense dark brown fur stiffened on the back of his hand and up his wrist. Kurst feared the rods and the machine because of what the gaunt man had done to him with them, and because of what he might have do again. Kurst did not know what that machine had stripped from him, but he promised himself that he would not lose any more of it to him, to the gaunt man, or to the machine. He controlled his fear, willed his left hand back into its human shape, and walked out of the shadows toward the gaunt man. On the world of Orosh, the world on which Kurst had been born and recruited into his service, he was known as Lord Byron Salisbury, Earl of Waterford, but those in his service, To those who understood the mysteries of the cosmos, he was the Gaunt Man. Kurst suspected that Lord Salisbury had not been born on Arosh, if a word born could apply to him. The Gaunt Man was 6.5 feet tall, only an inch shorter than the massive Skythack standing next to him. His narrow head held his hollow-cheeked face on a long, slender neck that merged into a narrow shoulder. His thin, long-armed body in the white laboratory coat that he wore when working in the chamber reminded Kurst of an animated stalk of dry winter hay. His dragon-topped cane rested against a nearby wall. Kurst suddenly slipped into place at the stone table beside the Gaunt Man, bowing to his master while pointedly ignoring Skythack. "Ah, Kurst, how nice of you to join us," the Gaunt Man said. With a sneer on his long face, Skythack snickered evilly. "You sent for me, master?" Kurst said. "How might I serve you?" "Wanted you to witness the final stage of this stormer's existence. This is one of your catches, is it not?" Kurst studied the young man, and his hand unconsciously stroked the rapidly vanished scar beneath his shirt. "Ah, yes, Kurst," laughed the larger Skythack. "For all your vaunted speed, this stormer actually wounded you. Perhaps you should be put out to the kennels so you might spend your old age in comfort." "That's enough," the Gaunt Man said abruptly. Then he turned his attention back to the man on the stone slab and said to Kurst, "I am almost finished here. This stormer is hardly worth permanently connecting to the machine, but I can still make use of his possibilities. Watch." The Gaunt Man made some minor adjustments to the instruments of the machine, and the flashes of energy bursting from the knobbed ends of the rods in the stormer's chest became more and more intense in their eruptions. "Now I shall strip him clean," said the Gaunt Man as he threw a gnarled lever. With that, the stormer screamed and thrashed wildly. The pain, while unbearable, only lasted a moment. Then a crackling cloud of light burst from the tops of the embedded staves and hovered briefly over the stone slab. Kurst thought he saw the stormer swarm within the cloud, but then the energy was sucked into the giant gridwork of brass and glass that made up much of the rest of the machine, joining with the rest of the lightning that constantly played across the lattice. "Now," the Gaunt Man sighed as he adjusted the dials, "his possibilities are mine." Kurst looked to the stone slab, but all that remained of the stormer, once his possibilities were yanked out, was a lifeless, dried hulk. And that's the end of chapter 30. We're going to call it today. Hope you people who joined in enjoyed the chat, enjoyed the stream. I'm going to keep these archived on YouTube so that you can go through the whole book again. You gotta admit that I didn't realize how fractured the story takes place before everything coalesces together. We were taking place. The books had to put together the entire story of the game from all around the world into one cohesive unit, and this is about as clear as we could get it. It's still kind of cloudy, I gotta admit, but it's worth reading. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I shall catch everyone next time. Talk to you later.